Hello and welcome to the Raptors Show on Sportsnet 590 The Fan. Reminder, we're streaming live on Sportsnet's YouTube channel and airing live on Sportsnet 360 Monday to Friday from 2 to 3 p.m. I'm your host, William Liu, and this being Wednesday, I am joined by Vivek Jacob, Raptors.com, friend of the program, friend of the community, just good dude overall. V, are you going down to the mysterious press conference down at OVO today?
I will be. We will see who is there, who's ready and waiting for us.
Do you want me to ruin the surprise for you?
No, I'm kidding, man. We all know it's going to be Otto Porter Jr.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, I was a little surprised. They just kind of like, usually, Raptors PR would like send out an email and it'd be like availability with, and it was just like,
There's
what
not
was the
enough
headline?
drama in Raptors land right now.
Yeah. The headline officially said media advisory dash availability with free agent signee, and then even in the details of the email did not say who it was going to be. But I mean, come on, we knew who it was, Otto Porter Jr. But imagine at 4:00 they're just like, hey, Kevin Durant's going to be here. That'd be cool.
I mean, so we're saying the Nets bought out Kevin Durant?
Honestly, it depends, man. Joe Tsai seems to be moving. He's frustrated, man. Honestly, obviously, this is not going to happen. But let's say no team in the league was willing to trade for Kyrie. Do you think you would have tried to buy out Kyrie, man?
Oh, my goodness. Oh, man.
Just based on how much Joe Tsai apparently and reportedly and also very obviously disliked this whole situation.
Yeah, I mean, if it were completely up to him, I wouldn't rule it out. I would imagine that Sean Marks would just talk some sense into him and say, hey, there's at least some kind of trade value to be gained here. And, maybe you end up just doing that Russell Westbrook deal and try to get a couple picks out of it. But yeah, I don't think Sai is about to just let Kyrie Irving off the hook like that.
No. Okay. We're not here to talk about Kyrie. We're here to talk about what we have been talking about for I don't know, man, 4 shows straight, which I don't think there's been any
Kevin
signs.
Durant.
There's no signs of stopping this. I'm sorry. I know people on the Raptors fan base are probably still very interested in this. Probably eventually, we're probably going to reach the point maybe later this week where you would want to hear about anything else. And look, in all fairness to myself, we did do an entire interview on Christian Coloco and his time in Arizona with his associate head coach, Jack Murphy, yesterday. It was a great interview. I really enjoyed it. Shared a lot of insights. Obviously, all of it was positive because, that's his coach. But I think there's just a lot of good background there. And you know what? I just think that, there are other things to talk about. However, it's hard to talk about anything else when this possibility is out there. And so my thought coming into today's show, because it's obviously daily, is just, is there another angle to talk about this same topic? And for me, the angle I came up with was 2 angles. Number one, I kind of want to go through the Raptors roster as is and look at, in terms of which players would have the most trade value, and rank that and go through that ranking with you. And then afterwards, if we still got some time left over, I wanted to look at what are the other trade packages out there that the Raptors might be competing with, given the reporting. And, it's, to be honest, we haven't heard firm reporting on these things. It's not like this team is offering this team is offering this, but we obviously know that what did Woj say? After Kevin Durant made his trade request, I think half the league called up the Nets and offered some deals. So we'll look at some of the best trade packages. But let's start with that. Raptors trade assets ranked. So Vivek, go ahead. Who is the number 1 trade asset on the team?
Well, the number 1 trade asset is Scotty Barnes. It's just he is pretty much untouchable. So whether that's worth even putting him on the list is debatable. And I guess the other side of this is his salary. And so that also adds to the fact that he should be untradeable, because, say, for example, in this hypothetical Kevin Durant deal that would involve Scotty Barnes, you are going to have to give up a couple more of your core. And then it's just outrageous, right? You're not giving up Scotty Barnes and OG Anunoby and Gary Trent Jr. You're not going to be a championship contender. with that trade. So, um, yeah, you follow that up with Pascal Siakam, uh, then OG Anunoby, Fred Van Vliet, Gary versus Precious. I think is interesting. I think because of the numbers, it's easier to obviously work a Gary deal than it is a Precious deal
Mhm.
because of the contracts. So you probably put Gary ahead of Precious, but in terms of ceiling, you'd probably say that Precious has the higher ceiling at this point in their careers.
Okay, that's interesting that you made that list because to me, the only disagreement I would have is I would still have Fred over OG Anunoby.
Mm.
And so actually we have a good sense of what OG's trade value would be, or at least a floor, because obviously he was involved. At least Portland was trying to make those overtures, and it was a number 7 pick. It was expiring salary. Honestly, a pretty good player in Josh Hart, like definitely a rotation player for a good team. Young enough, obviously as well. And whether you believe the reports or not, potentially another pick that was in the future, or maybe another prospect. Let's just say 2 picks, right? And we know that that was essentially turned down, or the Raptors didn't even really entertain it to that degree. Obviously, OG's still on the roster, and so clearly they valued him more than that. But we can kind of say that's the floor. Do you think that same package right now would be able to? Would you do that for Fred, or would the Raptors even do that for Fred? Because I would say no.
Um, so you're saying just replacing OG with Fred, with Gary and the picks?
No, I'm saying in this sort of like again the trade assets sort of ranked. You're
Yeah,
ranking ahead at Scotty, Pascal, OG, Fred, Gary, Precious, and Gary Precious is
yeah,
sort of like close. To me,
yeah.
I would slot Fred and OG because if I were trying to make a trade with the Raptors, you look at a guard who has made the All Star team, a guard who has obviously won the championship, um, a great presence to have in your locker room, someone who could come in and stabilize things for you. I would value that more than OG right now.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I think the side that I'm coming at it from is there are probably teams on the outside looking at OG and saying there's more potential to be realized there, and the value of a wing player in this league
Mhm, mhm.
is probably higher than what Fred is in terms of his physical prototype. And so I think there are teams that'll be more tantalized by that prospect than a Fred Van Vliet. Although, Fred obviously brings tremendous 3-point shooting, the leadership. He's a culture setter, a tone setter. Those
Playmaker.
are things. Yep. Those are
Yep.
things that uh, OG doesn't necessarily bring to the table. So it depends. I would say it's almost based on organizational need. Um,
Yeah, fair, fair. It's close enough where you gotta consider that. Although I have to say
yeah.
though, Fred is very much the more accomplished player right now. Like there's not a debate about that.
Oh,
And
yeah,
he's
that's
more productive right
100%.
now. Yeah.
There's no debate about that. I just think if you're weighing up a guy who's 24 versus the guy who's 28, how much is left in Fred's ceiling as a player versus how much is left in OG's theoretical ceiling?
Mhm.
If you're a team, say for example, Brooklyn, looking to sort of build from the ground up, if you trade Kevin Durant, uh, then I could see them sort of saying, "Hey, we like the prospect and the timeline of having OG on board rather than Fred VanVleet."
Fair enough, fair enough. Would you have done
And
eh,
defensively,
yeah.
if you have Ben Simmons and OG Anunoby together, if Ben Simmons is on the court, I mean that's
I
pretty
mean,
tempting.
yeah, fair enough. It's a big if. Actually, by the way, Brooklyn, if they just brought back all the players and somehow got them to get along, would be a nice team. But nevertheless, that's not happening apparently. Um,
Yeah.
just hypothetically, that trade
hmm
proposal that Portland had put out for OG, um, would you have done that deal for the Raptors if it was offered for Fred instead? Obviously, it wouldn't have been. They weren't trying to pair Dame with Fred, but just hypothetically, would you have done that deal? Because for me, I'm still saying no, man. I need more than that. Essentially, two firsts.
Yeah, I would not. So it was the number 7 pick, Josh Hart,
Mhm.
and then another pick. Yeah, probably not.
Yeah.
I think in terms of what Fred brings to the table, uh, to not have that leader on board makes it difficult, right? I think even when you're evaluating a Kevin Durant deal,
Mhm, mhm.
anything that involves Fred, you have to assess what the team culture is going to look like, what the leadership in the locker room is going to look like.
Right.
Obviously, Pascal made big strides there, but when you look at the way things went the other way in Brooklyn, you want someone in that locker room who is going to hold the fort.
Mm.
And so I think that's where Fred really has crucial value to the Raptors, and you have to evaluate those things as well.
Yeah, no doubt. And again, I have to say, he is also just a better player right now. I think that's also significant
Yeah,
in this discussion.
he
Okay, Gary versus Precious. That one's interesting to me because I think obviously long term wise, you probably prefer Precious. The thing is, like, while making a trade, it's not just about like which player you like or which player's future you like. It's also about um, like their contracts, right? And it's hard to just trade
mhm.
for Precious. Like for example, I've seen a lot of people like in this discussion of KD, like, hey, what if we threw Precious into the deal? Number one, I actually don't like that. I don't want to see Precious in that deal. I would rather give up a future first than give up Precious right now because he can definitely play
Mhm.
for you right now. You need pieces in your rotation. If you trade multiple starters for KD, you're probably going to need another starter, obviously, to step in because you're now starter deficient. Precious is the guy that I would most be happy to graduate from the bench into the starting five. So I wouldn't move him. But
Also, if you trade both Precious and OG in a deal, you're losing both your best one-on-one defenders.
yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot. And you're then all of a sudden like immediately looking for a center, like, or not even a center, but like a big man who can kind of hold it down for you defensively. And
Yeah.
I'm not even sure if Precious can do that for you over the course of 4 playoff rounds at this current moment. But I'm definitely sure that if you go into the market right now, just try to trade for one at this point or sign one at this point when most of the free agency is over. I don't think that's possible. So I do think you have to hold on to Precious as much as possible, even if it means
Mhm.
giving up a future pick. Um, but yeah, Precious makes like 2 mil, and Gary's like at 17. Like it's much easier to trade for Gary than it is to trade for Precious because especially if you got to match
No
salaries, like you
question.
got to attach other things to Precious. But yeah, I mean, I think the thing with I think the appeal with Gary, I know a lot of people have mentioned that he has a player option after next season, he could opt out. I think nowadays, just like when the Raptors traded for him, right when he had the restricted rights, right, the Raptors traded Norm for Gary Trent Jr. last season, or I guess 2 seasons ago in Tampa, and
Mhm.
the whole idea was that you were going to retain his rights. I still think that trading for Gary or even trading for OG, who is expiring after next season, uh, has inherent value because you are obtaining their bird rights, especially nowadays in the NBA. Like, I really think that that's a huge thing to sort of acquire. And also just put aside the fact that Gary, let's say Gary went to Brooklyn, for example, and was like the second or I guess second or third option, depending on who's left over.
Mhm.
I don't have any doubts that Gary could probably, score like 20 points per game. I don't know how efficient it would be, but I do know that
I mean, Gary's gonna be looking in the mirror saying he's the first option.
yeah, that's fair. And and there's real value in that because I think some players need more confidence. I think some players lack confidence. I think Gary has like slightly more confidence than he sort of is warranted, but also his abilities really do suggest that he can score well. I mean, this past season, he just averaged 18 points per game,
Mhm.
So, man, honestly, the Raptors have a really nice team. This is the other thing I was going to talk about in the second half
That
was just like
that's
if we
why.
just kept the team together, the team's pretty good because the reason why the Raptors are mentioned in all these trade talks is because they have a really nice team. They have just enough depth that if you're able to aggregate some of these players together into one player like KD, you would still have enough left over to contend. But
And that's why they don't have to force the issue, right?
yeah,
Like, hey, there's going to be a line that they're not gonna want to cross in terms of the depth, the talent on the roster that they believe will be good enough to contend.
mhm,
And if there's a deal that goes over that line that gets you KD, they're not going to cross it.
yeah, fair enough. And that's the thing too is like you're Masai's dealing um, with no actual pressure, right? Exactly as you described. Like you're not desperate to make this trade. I would argue the Raptors were more desperate to make the trade even back in 2018 when they made the Kawhi trade. And the desperation came from the idea that okay, obviously the Raptors had a nice year, but you have to consider that it was like 4 or 5 years running of the Kyle DeMar core, and they were kind of hitting up against the ceiling, and They win
Mhm.
they were number one seed in the Eastern Conference, and then they go into the playoffs, and obviously they lose in that exact same fashion to the exact same opponent. And so there was like a, what are we doing? We have to change it up, right? But I
They
think,
had exhausted all their ideas, plans, excuses, everything,
yeah,
right? Like
they're out of
every
time.
possible way they could have tried to come at the postseason, they tried,
Hmm.
right? That final year was revamping the offense, convincing themselves that, oh, if you get home court against LeBron, it'll be different. And then it was the same. So
Yeah.
that's it's a far different situation now where you were expected to just build off of off of that Tampa experience and just say, hey, let's get back on track. Instead, you exceeded expectations, got into the playoffs, and so you got actually some additional growth that you weren't expecting by being in the postseason, and now you get to carry that forward. And so this is just the beginning. Like, if anything, you just compare this season to like 2013-14, or yeah, 2013-14, when they went 7 games against Brooklyn.
Mm. You know what? We owe Brooklyn some revenge. I gotta say, it's a lot of
Hmm.
unfortunate. I mean, look, listen, we've lost twice to the Nets in the playoffs, 2014, 2000, and 2007. Oh, 07, yeah, that was the year we lost in the Nets. Um, and then obviously the Vince trade. I guess and I guess if you really want to throw in like, um, if you really want to throw in the Goran situation, which I don't think ranks anywhere close to these two, but you know, there's there's just some get back. I think eventually. I do think that
Yeah.
the Nets organization collectively owes the Raptors a little bit here. But yeah, okay. So I agree with you. Those are the trade pieces. I think the rest of the players in the roster, not saying they're not good, but I just think that in terms of in a trade discussion, when you're looking at Thad, Chris Boucher, Otto Porter Jr., Christian Koloko when he signed, Malachi Flynn, Svi Mihalik, Kem Birch, Delano Banton, and then whoever's going to take that 15th spot could be Champagnie. Um,
Hmm.
I don't think that they're like moving a trade one way or the other. Really, I don't really think any of them have negative asset like value, quote unquote, unless you were talking about maybe Kem. But honestly, if he returns back healthy and he makes his contract is so small that I don't think that it's going to hold up any trade or sort of anything like that. So the team's in a good spot. And it kind of speaks to the roster building that we're having this conversation for Kevin Durant and have all these pieces offered. Before we talk about what other packages are out there for the Raptors to compete with, I mean, I'm sure you've been asked this question across different podcasts and everything like that. And I'm sure just you as a fan and as a journalist have been thinking about this quite a bit. What's the best trade offer right now that you would feel comfortable giving up for Kevin?
So basically, like a final offer. Um,
Yeah.
because I mean, ideally, I think you would like to do the OG Anunoby, Gary Trent, Kem Birch bunch of picks and get that done.
Yep.
Um, I would imagine if the Nets were willing to do that, it would be done already. But I think the final limit that I would be willing to go to
Mm-hmm.
is Pascal, Gary, and a couple picks. Because,
And picks? God damn.
yeah,
And
I think
picks.
maybe, yeah. But let me be clear. I'm not going more than 2 picks. Like one ideally.
Okay.
Because I do think the stuff about Rudy Gobert,
Yeah.
and Dejounte Murray, like there were no stars going back in those deals.
There weren't even like starters going back in those deals.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
So
Like the
that's
Spurs
where
just bought
the
or
draft
just
compensation comes down.
exactly. Yeah. Absolutely. That's the piece that people are worrying because people are like, well, we got to throw this trade package in and then you throw in 5 picks. And it's like the reason why, by the way, Utah did not get 5 picks. They got 4 picks. And then the first rounder this year was already used. If you want to call that 5 picks, I guess you want to call it. But technically, they didn't get to choose who that 5th pick is. I think there's a value in actually, as an organization, being able to choose who that player is. But regardless, if you want to say 5 picks is 5 picks. They didn't send back like enough elsewhere that were like starter level players. I think Patrick Beverly is a nice player that obviously if he gets bought
The
out,
best player in the deal is Jared Vanderbilt.
yeah. I mean, honestly, the best player
That's
in the deal might have been
just
Patrick Beverly. I mean, Vanderbilt's decent too, but again, even for a playoff team, I don't think he's starting. I don't think he's like carved out his spot. like if you were just to trade Pascal and turn them into picks right now, you probably get what? Honestly, at least 3 picks, right? At minimum.
Yeah. Yep.
I would say
I mean,
probably.
DeJounte got 3
I
picks.
wouldn't do it
So
for 3, but I would. 4 picks. I think will probably be even closer to what his value would be, and then Gary as well would at least get you 1 pick, at very minimum. Like Royce O'Neal got a pick. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, that's why this discussion of like,
So you're saying no picks. You're saying
if that's
would
the
you
deal,
do just Pascal and Gary?
2 starters. No, I'm not giving up a pick. There's just no need.
Okay.
I don't think this is the thing. This is the conversation. It's good that we had this at first, because I don't think when you're looking at the rest of the teams that are offering players, which other team, what let's say, Pascal is in the deal. And by the way, that has not been reported anywhere. But again, you have to assume that because this is Kevin Durant of all people, like everybody has to be discussed, right? And just because you were discussed does not mean you're not valued. In fact, it means you're actually
And
very
to be
valued.
clear, this is like my final offer.
Yes,
right?
after this, you're walking away.
Done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there a player, do you think, that's available for the Nets to acquire that would be better than Pascal if he were but available?
So this is the other side that I've been thinking about, where if the Nets are truly going to take their time with this, their best option then is to start shopping Ben Simmons.
Yep. Okay.
Because if they get Ben Simmons off their roster, then it opens up the possibility for these other teams to enter the picture and make better offers, right? Because so much of the complication we're seeing now is because of the designated rookie rule, and teams that, Phoenix, for example, DeAndre Ayton can't be there because Ben Simmons is on the roster. And so I think you've got a situation where if you're going to be patient, I think you have to move Ben Simmons, and then you open up the possibilities. Because I think one team that would be really interesting that isn't in the picture right now is Denver.
Okay.
So Michael Porter Jr., Jamal Murray, they can't be on the same team as Ben Simmons.
Okay.
But if you were Denver, why would you not look to make a Kevin Durant deal if it was feasible?
Is that enough? Like, I know, I mean, obviously when healthy, those guys are very good, but Michael Porter Jr. is like a huge question mark health-wise. And we all love Jamal here in Toronto. Obviously, he's a big part of the Canadian national program, but until I see what he looks like coming off the injury, I don't know. I think Pascal has definitively more value than that. And that's the thing, too. I'm just like, in these conversations, I know, because Alex is already in the DMs being like, you guys are shopping at SVP prices. This is a Holt Renfrew deal. You got to overpay for this. And I agree, man. This is Kevin Durant. At the same time, the idea is not fully to like put on the scale on one side Kevin Durant, and then on the other side enough talent and picks and assets or whatever to balance the scale for Kevin Durant. Even though that is technically what you're doing, but what you're really doing is making sure that your side of the scale with your assets and your picks are more than any other offer for Kevin Durant.
Yes.
You are not
100%.
You are not trying to match the value for Kevin so much as you are trying to surpass the value that other teams are offering for Kevin, because he can't come back. I know Brooklyn is kind of posturing about this.
Back to.
Yeah, that's the idea. You're not bargaining with the store. You're bargaining with the next person that's going to buy it. It's an auction, I guess. It's probably
there's a big difference between making the best offer available and the best offer possible.
Yes, absolutely.
If you're making the best offer possible, then absolutely Scotty Barnes is on the table, and you're just making the best offer possible.
Yeah.
If you're trying to make the best offer available, then you're just trying to beat out these other teams.
Yeah.
And so that's where you look at the assets and say, okay, this is what works. This is what leaves the Raptors a championship contender. And if it's not good enough for the Nets, then it's not good enough, and they can just continue to deal with the problem.
Yeah. And they don't want to deal with the problem. Because I made this point on the weekend podcast episode with Alex. It was just like, Joe Tsai is the co-founder of Alibaba, which is like, I don't know if it's bigger than Amazon or whatever. I don't really keep track of these things, but like essentially an Amazon scale type of company. So you're essentially dealing with Jeff Bezos. I don't think like Jeff Bezos would put up this kind of I don't think he would want to deal with this kind of level of problem. I don't think he would have this much patience for what's going on in Brooklyn the last couple of years. So I think that's the way to think about it. Clearly, they can't bring him back. I guess the only thing I'm really concerned about, because like for me, the Suns, like the more I'm thinking about what the Suns can offer, even if they put everything they possibly can into this deal, they find a taker for Aiden that gets good assets back to Brooklyn. They put in Bridges. They put in 5 picks, whatever else. Their team left over is not good.
Mm-hmm.
Even with Kevin even if you have Kevin Durant, Chris Paul, and Devin Booker on the roster, and by the way, that would be a very formidable top 3. What is the rest of the team around them? Like, who else even starts at the other 2 positions? Is Bismack Biyombo starting at center for you?
Yeah.
Because like, let's say they keep Jay Crowder.
That's a
Okay,
problem.
Jay Crowder could be the 4th guy. That's fine. Who's the 5th guy? You traded Aiden. JaVale just signed somewhere else. Are you really starting Bismack? And then you're telling me that's your championship window is 38-year-old Chris Paul, Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, and finding out how all that meshes together while having 0 depth.
Right.
So, like, I don't know what Phoenix can really do, even though obviously I think KD really wants to go, or has wanted to go there. Even Phoenix, let's say they include Bam. Would you rather have Bam or Pascal? I'd rather have Pascal.
Yeah.
And Bam, by the way, they needed to find someone to take Ben Simmons first before they can even get Bam. So
exactly. No, this is where I've kind of reached where it's like, if they're going to take their time with it, then they got to move Ben Simmons. If they're looking to do a deal soon, then you're probably doing a deal with the Raptors.
Well, I hope that happens. But I also know that this thing probably will drag on for at least another week at minimum, I would say. And so I guess content-wise, I guess we're covered. So, Vivek, I appreciate you joining me. I'll probably ask you the same question next week or in the coming weeks. And in the meantime, I'll see you at OVO for the unveiling of Otto Porter Jr.
Yep. Sounds good. Take care, Will. Thanks a lot.
Appreciate you, man. All right. Before we go to break, I want to let you know that if you are in the Toronto area or want to watch some basketball this week, you can catch the inaugural Global Jam Showcase, the first of its kind. It's an international event. They're taking over the Mattamy Athletic Center from July 5th to 10th, and Sportsnet is serving up full court coverage of the debut men's and women's under-23 basketball showcase. You can catch all the action starting at 11 a.m. Eastern. Ben Shulman, Javon Shepard serve you the daytime coverage all week. And tonight you can watch the doubleheader between the USA and Canada with the women's squad facing off at 6 p.m. Eastern on Sportsnet 1, followed by the men's team at 9 p.m. Eastern on Sportsnet and Sportsnet 1, with both games being called by Matt Devlin and Amy Audibert. I got to say, I watched both games yesterday. This is not in the ad read. This is just me speaking from the experience. I was watching both games last night. The women's side, a very competitive game against Belgium. Getting to watch Aaliyah Edwards, just an incredible talent, honestly. Canada overcoming a bit of a slow first quarter and winning the game at the end there. Very exciting, very hard fought. And then an even better game, I thought, on the men's side was the Canadians obviously facing off against Brazil. And Brazil apparently had a team. Obviously, I wasn't that familiar, but, Matt and Amy were telling me on the broadcast, it's a team with a lot of professional players, even though it's an under-23 tournament. A lot of professional players going up against a lot of pretty recognizable names on the Canada side, even if you're more of a casual fan. But you've definitely heard of some of these names. And, to see the way Canada's able to sort of, they had control kind of heading into halftime. They built a decent enough lead. Third quarter, the Brazilians came back. They were getting every offensive rebound. They're hitting all sorts of threes. It got to be a very, very close game in the fourth quarter, and it took a really nice effort. I thought Marcus Carr played really well. I thought the Miller brothers played really well as well, and it was just really, really fun to watch. And for me, sitting at home, I was like, I could have just made time to go down to Mattamy and watched it. So obviously, I made sure to clear my schedule tonight, so I will also be in the building for the 2 games against Canada, USA, and the USA on both the men's and the women's side. So seriously, I really highly recommend watching this thing. It's a lot of fun, and it really allows you to get familiar with a lot of the up-and-coming talent. Obviously from the Canadian perspective, but, basically across the world. Like, we have some really, really talented teams and countries being represented. So we are going to take that break. As I said, I'm your host, Wolu, and you've been listening to The Raptors Show on Sportsnet 590 The Fan. Welcome back to the Raptors Show on Sportsnet 590 The Fan. I'm your host, William Liu. Joining me for the second segment is one of my favorite people in the business, Zarar Siddiqui, co-founder of Raptors Republic, founder of Arsenalist, and most importantly, the guy who gave me my first shot in this business. So, Zarar, what's going on, man?
I'm all good, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. You know, obviously, I'm on hour probably 15 of KD talk. So,
What's left to be said?
You'd be surprised. You'd be surprised, Zarar. And I have prepared more, I guess, for us to talk about in the next 20 minutes or so. But no, seriously, it's just good to talk to you. And, over the weekend, it's one of those things where when something like this happens, you got to reach out to your Raptor friends and just get a sense of where they're at. And I texted you and I was like, would you do Scotty for KD eventually? And you said no. And that's fine because I think the Raptors are saying no too. Jake Fisher of Bleacher Report put out a story today, and he includes this note that says multiple sources say the Raptors are unwilling to surrender Scotty Barnes in the trade discussions right now. So it seems like the front office is also very much on your side. You texted me back. I really like Scotty. Haven't got those feels since Vince, which kind of got me thinking about. Obviously, we're only seeing rookie Scotty Barnes so far, but how would you compare the level of enthusiasm for Scotty right now to when Vince first entered as a Raptor as a rookie?
I think they both share the element of surprise between them because I think when we drafted Vince, nobody quite expected him to be the electric player that he came to be almost immediately. And Scotty, maybe not as electric as Vince in terms of jumping ability and flair and that sort of stuff, has surprised us with his with his raw skill and how quickly he has turned that skill into actual outcomes on the court. Usually, you talk about rookies and you talk about, oh well, next year he's going to develop a mid-range game, and the year after he'll develop a handle. Hell, we were in year 8 of DeMar DeRozan waiting for him to develop a handle. So,
but it happened.
Scotty. It did happen, and for Scotty, it sort of happened in year 1. A lot of those things happen. So I think there's definitely a parallel to be drawn there, and it's not just homerism with Scotty, right? It's accolades from across the league, other GMs, other players. So I think it's a very easy comparison to say that he's the best rookie we've had, since Vince. I don't think that's even a question. So there's definitely some parallels that are very valid there.
Yeah, no doubt. And, again, like I think for me, the reason I'm asking this too is because, I came into Raptor fandom like a little bit later on. I missed like peak Vince years. In fact, like the first year I started, I remember watching the Raptors was the year he was like feigning the injuries and wanting out and all this other stuff. Basically, superstars have been getting their way in the NBA for a very long time. But I think in the question about Scotty and Vince, I think the thing too is just like was when I guess Vince first became a Raptor, and I'm sure there weren't any discussions at that time, but was it a feeling like there's nobody I would trade him for? Because that's kind of the feeling I'm getting from Raptor fans about Scotty. Like I think if I were to poll Raptors Twitter right now, I would struggle to find like 5 or 6 consensus players that Raptor fans would feel happy about trading Scotty for a one-on-one right now. Is that kind of the feeling that Vince had too?
I think that's a good point because I think with Vince, you wouldn't find anybody who would trade Vince at the time. But that also has to do with the poverty of the franchise preceding Vince versus what Scotty is now. I think the people who are saying that they're comfortable trading Scotty is only because, well, they have Pascal Siakam and Fred VanVleet and other good players on the roster. If you traded Vince back in the day, you had I don't know, Sharon Wright. So it's sort of apples and oranges when it comes to like who you're willing to trade. But in terms of excitement, easily. I mean, Scotty has I think rejuvenated my long-term enthusiasm for this franchise. I think when you look at Fred VanVleet and Pascal Siakam, they sort of represent the next, maybe, I don't know, depending on how you look at windows, maybe 2 to 4 years or 2 to 5 years. But Scotty projects out like over a 5 to 10 year span. So he's definitely he's definitely a deeper anchor point when you're trying to build this franchise than the two guys that I mentioned. So I think that there's some differences there.
Yeah, I think I'm really happy you brought that up because I think that's probably the one point, even though we're on hour 15 of KD discussions, is just like haven't really thought about the long-term prospects of the franchise, just of the organization in general. And as you mentioned, and I read your piece on Raptors Public as well. It's very good on this topic. And the point you made there was the point you just made, which is that you have your current core right now, and you have your current leaders, but then right afterwards, you have a very natural transition point to Scotty. And it's like the team build right now makes a lot of sense. The question is, can this team build eventually get to a championship level? But sometimes I think it's to say that the championship is the only thing that matters is technically true because that is what all the teams are playing for. But also at the same time, what matters most matters, but then what matters after that also matters, which I know sounds very silly to think just say as a statement, but like you have Scotty right now and the team build right now where you have some sort of transition point 3-4 years down the line if you need to make that move. Right now, I think the Raptors are in a position where they don't have any pressure to make this trade, which I think probably helps Masai in some of his leverage. I think the other question to think about, obviously in terms of the championship contention, is would the Raptors be a championship contender if they flipped up, let's say, 2 or 3 starters into Kevin Durant? And I think your answer to that was still they probably still don't get past Boston.
Well, so there's two questions there, right? So the first, I definitely agree that the time is on the Raptors side. Our status quo is better than the Nets status quo. So that alone should tell you in any negotiation who has the upper hand. And the fact that Kevin Durant has handed in a trade request also puts pressure on the Nets. I mean, if that information wasn't public, maybe they'd be in a better place, but they're not. So definitely, I think we should bide our time. I think as time passes, the amount of offers that the Nets will receive will, I would say, decline in quantity. I want to say, just because if somebody was really chomping at the bits and making this deal, they would have offered something to the Nets already, and they would have bid on it. But maybe Sean Marks is biding his time. I don't know. But the second point about does getting Kevin Durant make us a championship team? Our center position is still unaddressed to me. And much like when we did the Leonard trade, we then got Gasol because we had enough assets to fill, a pretty significant, need in the center spot. The same is true today. I'm not sure the Raptors will have enough assets to make that secondary move to tie up the remaining gaps in this roster to get us to a championship team. What if you trade picks and let's say Gary Trent Jr. and OG are being talked about. If they go the other way, now you get Kevin Durant. Okay, now you wanna fill a center spot or you want to fill some ball handling need. What are you gonna do? Like what asset are you gonna trade away to address that? Are you just gonna hope that the current status, the current roster sort of develops that capability? I don't know. I honestly don't have the answer to that. But I do know that it's a risk that did not exist in the Leonard situation because we had Pirtle and JV on the roster.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And honestly, I think for a lot of fans, like, make the comparison to the Kawhi trade. I mean, that was such a good trade. It's just hard to expect that as the standard for every single trade. Like, it's like if it's not as like ideal as that trade was. And by the way, even at that time, I remember a lot of people being so upset. In fact, I remember running into like season ticket holders and having conversations with them during that season, the regular season. And I was like, so like, yeah, they traded, DeMar for Kawhi, and they were just like, I would never forgive the front office for that. I will never forgive Masai for doing that. And of course, I do wonder like what they would have said, obviously in hindsight, seeing how that turned out. But yeah, I mean, it's a hard stand to get to. But I agree with you. I think so. In terms of the Raptors' general team building strategy, then, right? Because my interpretation of it has been this: it's just Raptors obviously draft. They scout really well. They bring them into the organization. They give them roles, and if they are obviously dedicated enough to the work, they become really, really good players. They get paid. The Raptors will pay them, and then they're able to, if they choose to, flip those pieces into essentially disgruntled stars. Because basically, stars aren't just signing in Toronto. That's just something that has not happened yet, and probably won't happen in the future either. Is that team build? I mean, given that strategy, like, wouldn't trading for Kevin Durant right now kind of fit that team strategy, or are you saying maybe it's like it's a little bit too early in the process to be doing that?
I mean, the Raptors are like completely vertically integrated as a franchise. Like
Okay,
they sort of have this system built where you can get in guys really young and raw And then because of the 905, because of their coaching ability and their overall strategy as a franchise, you can see that player through to Pascal Siakam and Fred VanVleet. So it's almost like you source the player very early on, and then you develop it, and then you turn them into stars. It's a nice little system that they have here. Would acquiring Kevin Durant, affect that? No, I don't think it will. But I think there's a related point here: is that if you look at the Raptors right now, they're sort of covered, in the short term, in the near term, and in the long term, just based on how their roster is structured. If you get Kevin Durant, you're sort of giving up the long-term certainty of you're giving up a long-term floor that you kind of know exists if you trade away some of your young assets. So you're sacrificing, I'd say, your medium term to long term strategy a little bit. But at the same time, because this franchise has been so good at drafting, it's less of a risk than if we had a different GM who was not capable of making good draft picks.
Right.
And in the article that I wrote, I made the counter. The argument that I made is that you got to see who is making the draft picks. If it was like, Rob Babcock making the draft picks, you would look at draft picks a different way than if it was Masai Ujiri making the draft picks.
Yep.
So by giving up assets, you're not, and I'm trying to argue against myself here, right? By giving up assets, you may not be sacrificing too much because your franchise is good at drafting. Will you hit Scotty Barnes jackpot twice? I don't know, but it's less of a risk than maybe for some other teams.
Fair enough. Yeah, and to the point about on Brooklyn side, the reports now, Jake Fisher mentioned it, but also Shams mentioned this. It could take weeks, if not months. Could take the remainder of the offseason, which I mean, honestly, if the best offer on the table, let's say from the Raptors side, hypothetically, is like OG plus Gary plus 4 picks, like if I were Brooklyn, I would wait because like in September I get that same deal. Maybe other teams eventually step up their offers as well, but I guess there's no pressing need to make this trade absolutely right now, especially with KD on the books for 4 years. It's not like his trade value will ever really decline, at least this season alone. But yeah, I mean, in that scenario, I guess, Zora, like, are we just going to be talking about this as people who cover the Raptors, like, every day? Like, are we, when do people stop scrolling? Like, I don't know about you. Are you constantly scrolling Twitter? Are you, every 5 minutes thinking about maybe, this or that about Kevin Durant? Like, I actually want to know your health as a Raptor fan.
No, I don't scroll Twitter at all. I mean, They invented notifications about 10 years ago, so since then I don't need to worry about scrolling and refreshing. But I do. I don't think it's going to last months because the Nets also want some finality here. I think they want a conclusion. Kevin Durant wants a conclusion. I don't think it helps them dragging this out for too long. So as you said in your intro, this might drag another week, maybe 2 weeks. I don't see it going past that, to be honest with you.
Fair enough. And this is the time to make a deal. Most of the executives in the league are in summer league right now at Vegas.
There you go.
So, this is also the same timeline when Kawhi was moved, for example, was partially because of the meetings that take place in Vegas every year around this time around summer league. I mean, look, listen, if there's no trade, do you think people will be disappointed at all? Or do you think it would be a rational point for anyone to be disappointed if no trade was ultimately made for Kevin Durant and the Raptors just brought back the same team they have right now?
That's the thing. I don't think people will be disappointed because our current state is pretty damn good. And Kevin Durant is more icing on the cake rather than an absolute need this franchise has right now. And the parallel again with the Kawhi Leonard trade is that I think if the Kawhi Leonard trade hadn't happened, people would be more disappointed because the DeMar Kyle team had sort of maxed out. It was at its ceiling, and people were kind of tired of watching the same show over and over again. So maybe there was a sense of like almost just getting tired with the team, and you know what you're going to get. Here, we don't know what we're going to get. All we know is that Scotty's going to get better, Pascal's going to get better. So things are only going to improve here. That wasn't the case with the Leonard trade. So I don't think people will be upset. Like if you've sold yourself that the Raptors are absolutely in the mix for Kevin Durant and they don't get Kevin Durant, I think this is where you kind of trust Basai, hate to say that, to just know that the deal was not good for the franchise. I think that's the thing with this management team that we've had for the last few years is that you can trust them to make these 50-50 decisions and get them right.
Yeah. And they will do it too. I mean, like, I think that's one of the enduring legacies of that Kawhi trade is like, if they need to make that hard decision, they will do it, and they will make it as so long as it's the right move for the team. And that's where I'm like, I'm not too pressed, because I think both outcomes are pretty decent. Honestly, obviously you assume that they don't give up everything for Kevin. I don't think they need to in this situation, because I don't think that anyone else's bidding is that high to the point where you need to give up all your sort of desirable players. But if the outcomes are you either get Kevin Durant or you just roll back this team that has the Rookie of the Year on it, has 5 two-way players in the starting lineup who are all scoring more than 15 points per game, and you have an all-star returning, you have Pascal Siakam coming off an all-NBA type season. Nick Nurse obviously is a very, very good coach. And obviously we'll see how the Raptors make that next jump into contention. But, both outcomes look pretty good to me. And I guess, if I were to ask you that one last question, it would just be like, how would the Raptors make that jump into contention? Do you see that sort of jump already built within the roster right now? Or do you still see that maybe it's not Kevin right now because the timing's not great or the situation's not great, but maybe down the line they still ended up making that sort of like players that we've grown for players that have already reached that superstar status?
Yeah, I think as we're talking about something ridiculous like 4 picks, Gary and OG. Now, if you just take half of those assets and you try to parlay them into people you actually need to contend right now and plug maybe the center hole better or get some 3-point shooting,
Hmm.
I think that's a completely viable strategy and probably easier to execute, I'd say even. Or maybe not easier to execute because Kevin Durant is like one trade and then you got to do a couple here. But that's a strategy. You can use the same assets that you were going to go towards Kevin Durant and do a bunch of other things, like getting a center, like getting some 3-point shooting. I know we got Otto Porter already, but improve some ball handling. So that's perfectly viable, and I think most fans will be happy with that because they know the floor of this team. They got some exciting talent. There's only positive things you can say about the Raptors. So, as I said, at the start, time is on the Raptors side. If the Nets don't want to make a deal, I wouldn't necessarily call it opportunity missed from the Raptors' perspective.
Fair enough. All right, Zarar, appreciate you joining me on the program. Miss talking to you. People don't know the first ever podcast I did was with you, and because of you, actually.
Yeah, I think it was I think we did I think we started it was like LeBronto Cavs series. We started doing post game podcasts.
We definitely did those. I think that might be even 2017. We did.
Yeah, that was later.
But even before that, we were doing Raptors Weekly, and I think it was me, you, and Andrew Thompson, and then I think you were getting a degree or something, and you were like, "I need someone to host the podcast," and I was like, "I'm going to do it," and eventually launched my career. And you gave me my first ever Yeti USB microphone, and it just changed my life. So I appreciate you eternally, Zarar.
You're the best, man.
Appreciate you. All right, well, we have wrapped up enough Kevin Durant discussion for today. At least we'll see if there's more news tomorrow. Honestly, I would because this is such an unprecedented situation, I would actually really like some feedback from fans in terms of like, is this too much? Have we covered all the angles? Do you want to talk about something other than Kevin Durant tomorrow? Let me know, please, because thank you, producer. Because honestly, it is kind of weird to go through a whole week and talk about some sort of hypothetical that the Raptors don't even have firm links tying them to this player. But then again, it's also the offseason, and obviously we'll bring you other content, but right now, that's what you got. So that does it for us today. I'm your host, Willu. You've been listening to The Raptors Show on Sportsnet 590 The Fan. Make sure you find The Raptors Show wherever you listen to podcasts and subscribe. And please rate and review our show. Reminder, we're streaming live on Sportsnet's YouTube channel and airing live on Sportsnet 360 Monday to Friday from 2 to 3 p.m. Thanks again to my guests, Vivek Jacob and Zarar Siddiqui, our board producer, Derek Brandale, and Jennifer Rolnick for helping us with the YouTube stream. I'll be back tomorrow.